Hey mech fans, Bucko here from Bucko's Raging Bulls Mercenary Company. Another video on my delve into the Battletech universe. If you do like the video, please click and subscribe. So without any further ado, let's drop! So, we've got a continuation here of my Battletech painting videos, carrying on from the blue tack camouflage method that I showed in my opening video. I'm going to now take this Thunderbolt mech all the way through to a finished paint job. So it's quite a long video, okay? I'll try and speed up several steps of it so you can see the whole thing together and talk you through each individual step. So the colours again, I'm going to be using matte white from Army Painter. I'm going to be using Jungle Green from Army Painter. I'm going to be using Crystal Blue, Army Painter again. Pure Red from Army Painter. I'm going to be using Plate Mail Metal from Army Painter. Agrax Earthshade from Citadel. And I'm going to be using a lot of the Army Painter's washes, including red, blue, green, and purple tone. I'll also be applying a number of decals, which are from World War II British forces, actually. I find they look really good on these mechs. So I'm going to start the painting process. The first colour I'm going to start with is the Army Painter White. And we're going to start off by painting the cockpit. So, we're going to take our palette here, we're going to get a little bit of the Army Painter White out onto our palette, like so. And we're going to take a decently small brush. I use Army Painter, I use the Army Painter character for most of the work I'm doing on these mechs, because they are quite small scale. Load up your brush. Now, the Army Painter paints tend to be quite thin, so you're not really going to need to thin them unless you've given them a chance to thicken up in the pot. And we're just going to start by painting in the cockpit here. And we're just filling the cockpit in nice and carefully with white. And the reason I'm doing the cockpit in white will become clear when I show you the next step, which involves applying a wash. So anywhere you can see the cockpit window, so on a Thunderbolt you've got a couple of small side ones here. Just going to dab them in white. There we go. So that's the cockpit in white. That's the first step. Very straightforward. Thoroughly wash your brush out. Put your palette to one side. And you've got to let that dry. While that's drying, you can get on with the next step, which is Plate Mail Metal. So again, take some of this, pop that onto your palette, and again, using the character brush, I find the character brush just gives you that level of control you need for these kind of models. We're going to go, and I personally paint any of the hardware on the mech that isn't part of the basic chassis. So, for example, I'll start on this Thunderbolt, I'll start with the missile launcher up at the top here, and all the missile tubes in here. I'm going to start by painting all this in the metal colour. So we're just going to keep working all those bits of hardware, as I was saying. So anywhere that the Thunderbolt has a bit of hardware on it, so machine guns. It's got a couple of machine guns here on this left arm. Okay, it's got a couple of lasers there on the left torso. So we're just going to fill those in metal. And this just helps to give the mech a bit of character, something other than the camouflage paintwork on it to look at. So anyway, you've got the hardware, as you can see, I'm just painting them in now, lasers. So there's those lasers there. Got a couple of components here that look like they're hardware on the right torso. Can't remember exactly what the Thunderbolt's armed with on its right torso. I have to have a look at my technical readout just to remind myself of that one. I haven't really played with the Thunderbolt yet, so stuff's not stuck in my head with this mech, but I'll get there. I'm just working along, so for example, the large laser here, I'm going to give that a coat. And just filling in anywhere that the hardware is on the mech. We're just doing a coat of this metal, plate mail metal from Army Painter. What I tend to do then as well is go around the back of the mech, and anywhere you can see what looks like a heat sink or a heat vent or an engine vent, anything like that, again, just touch that in. Go to the plate mail, rear of the launcher for the missiles, anywhere that you imagine that the techs are either not going to bother to paint because they know it'll just wear off, or that will have worn off during the use of the hardware. So missile launcher vents, machine gun barrels, laser barrels, heat sinks. That's all prime examples of parts of a mech that are going to wear. Inside the knee actuators. Some people like to paint the arm or hand actuators. I'm not that fussed personally. I think that's work for no reason. So there's not actually that many components on this Thunderbolt that I would touch in with the silver. It's quite a straightforward mech chassis. In fact, that looks to be about everything I would coat with the silver. So while you were doing the silver, that will have given enough time for your white to dry. So then we're just going to go in with Army Painter's red tone. Take a little bit of this out, pop that on your palette there. And this is going to do your cockpit. And so you're just going to take a good bit of that on to your brush again. Don't want too much on there, just enough that you can put a coat on the cockpit. And where you put that white in, you're just going to give it a quick coat with the Army Painter's red wash. And that's just going to tint the cockpit for you. And that completes that stage of the mech. So really, that's the basics of this mech done now. It's a very straightforward mech with Thunderbolt. So I'm going to take a quick break there, go and look at my technical manual to work out what those lasers on the right side of the torso are. And then when I come back, we'll go into some more detail work once that silver has dried. Okay, so that should have allowed time for our silver to dry. Okay, so turns out that's an SRM2 on the right torso there. My mistake. So what I'm going to use here is Citadel Iron Dark Sun, which is my next colour I'm going to work with. I use this for my missile tubes. I find it makes the missiles sort of pop. So with this, you're going to go in the centre of the SRM, two little dabs. So it looks like it's got two yellow missiles in there. And the other bit I tend to put a little dab on is in the LRM launcher. If you can, there's very small tubes on this mech, so maybe a bit fiddly. A few dots of yellow. You might not be able to see that very well. I need to get the better, higher resolution camera on the go. But you're just putting a few dots of yellow into that LRM launcher in a few of the holes where the tubes would be. Just makes it look like the LRM launcher's got a few LRMs sticking out of it, ready to launch. And that is 90% of the mech done. So the next stage is, for me, I always then do my transfers at this point, so that when you then apply the finishing touches in the form of the washes, they blend the transfers into the mech. So I'm just going to prepare the transfers that I use. I'll get back to you in a second. Okay, so we've got the transfers that we're going to use here. So a pair of tweezers and a pot of water. And these are just standard water slide transfers. As I say, these are from Battlefront. These are actually designed for Flames of War. I believe it's the 11th Armoured British. So this is the icon I'm going to use for my... You can't really focus in on that very well there. But it's a wee Raging Bull icon. Looks like a bull on a yellow background. I believe it's the 11th Armoured Division's icon. So we've got that soaking in water. We're just waiting for that to dry, to release from its backing platform. And then on my mechs, I tend to go with a unifying theme. Left shoulder has the mercenary icon. Right shoulder has a weight class icon. In this case, it'll be 14 to show it's a heavy mech. My mech weight classes range from 2 for ultralight, 4 for light, 9 to 14, 7 to 9s are mediums, 14 to 15s are heavies, and then 27s to 30s are assaults. It just gives it, it's not really anything particularly relevant, it just gives it a wee bit of interest to the model. And then I've also got a wee 74 logo which goes on all my mechs, just makes it look like they're a uniformed force. United by the number 74. So they should have soaked now. So I'm going to put the Raging Bull icon on my left shoulder plate, if they'll come loose. Yeah, that's loose now. So we're just going to stick that on the left shoulder plate here. It's a bit fiddly. I hate water slide transfers. They're always a trick. Finding a way to hold the model and the slide transfer and a brush. Get that slide transfer on there. And use a bit of water to help it move around so you get it where you want it to go. So I'm going to go on the centre of this left shoulder plate here. And then the other one, I'm going to put a second one on this one, which I do tend to on my larger mechs. I tend to go somewhere on the thigh, one of the thigh plates there. And it just makes it look a bit more, gives it a bit of visual interest, helps to break up the camouflage and the general colours of the mech, and gives a little bit of something for you to look at. And we're going to do the same with the weight groupings. So 14 indicates it's in the heavy group. Of course, a Thunderbolt being 65 tons of metallic goodness. And again, I have the rules that I follow in that the weight classes go on the right shoulder, and if on a larger heavy mech or assault mech, they also go on the left thigh. And I'll show you a finished one here. Here you can see my assault, my awesome assault, and on the shoulders, as you can see, it's got the iconography. And then on the front plate, it's got the 74 in the middle and the 2 icons, and that's the finished effect we're going for. He's had the full wash, and you can leave it at that stage, or you can apply some battle damage, which I may do later. I haven't decided with these mechs, but they should have come loose from the backing now. So let's try and get the weight categories on this mech. So again, bit of water, help you move it to where you want it. We're going to get it in roughly the centre there of that shoulder plate. And then again, this weight category, we're going to put on the left thigh plate as well. So there's that. And lastly, last transfer that I do on my mechs is this 74 on a red-blue background. I know you can't really see it in much detail, But what I'll try and do is I'll stick a finished photo with a high resolution camera on at the end so you can see the finished mech. So then the 74 is going to go smack bang in the centre of the chest, right on that big armoured plate in the middle. It's not quite ready to come off the back in there. There we go. Okay, and that's there on that back, on the centre of the chest. Again, you might not be able to see, you can just about see the coloration of it there, but I'll get a high resolution photo of that for you in a second. And we'll come back when those transfers have had a chance to set, and we'll go through the next steps. Okay guys, so those transfers have had a few seconds to dry out and stick to the miniature. So I'm going to go on to the next step. One I use is this decal medium from Vallejo, or Vallejo, or however you pronounce it. And this just helps to soften the transfer, make it look less like a stuck-on transfer and more like a painted-on emblem from the real world. So I'm just going to give each transfer a generous dab of the softener or the decal medium. And again, it's alcohol based. It takes a few seconds to dry, probably a minute at most. You're just going to leave that on those transfers for a minute. Let it do its work to dry them onto the model. Okay, so the transfers have now dried and we're going to go on to applying our all over mech wash. This basically ties the whole mech together, weathers it all down, and gives a really nice earthy finish to the mech as a whole. So for this, it's Agrax Earthshade, and there's no secret to applying a wash. If you've worked with washes before, you'll know how this goes. Basically, I'm quite liberal with my washes. Some people prefer to use washes sort of in a pinpoint fashion, trying to get it to just flow into the recesses. I tend to find all that does is, you know, wastes the potential of the actual wash itself. The washes are generally, I find, a nice consistency to work with, so I just slap them on the mech, all over the whole mech. No sort of tricks here, just a good quick coat of the wash, nice and liberal on every surface, making sure it's got ample opportunity to run into all the lovely crevices and recesses that these plastic box set models have. I must admit, you know, I've loved Battletech for a long time. Ever since I was a young lad and my uncle introduced me to the MechWarrior technical readout for the clans, 3050 I believe it is. Technical readout 3050, the first one with the clan mechs in it, and he showed me the Mad Cat, and I fell in love with the mech at that point. Unfortunately, I looked into getting into the game earlier on when I was younger, and I was not sold on the Ralpartha and Ironwind Productions mechs, the metal castings. They just... I know they were based on a lot of the artwork, and I may get a bit of flack for this, but they didn't feel like combat machines. They were spindly, they had quite thin arms, quite thin legs, fragile looking joints, and certainly didn't look like they were a 100-ton armoured battle machine that was carrying enough firepower to level a small city and the armour to withstand enemies of equivalent firepower. They honestly looked like if someone looked at them with a stiff breeze, they were going to blow their arms off them. I must admit, though, these new models that are being put out now, that Catalyst and that are putting out, that are much more based on some of the models from the games. Harebrained Schemes Battletech game springs to mind. You know, they've got that very chunky military feel. And I think they really capture what Battletech is, which is massive armoured machines, basically blowing hell out of each other, sometimes for shits and giggles, as it were, but mostly for the fact that they're trying to capture something that someone somewhere in the inner sphere thinks is worth capturing Or, you know, in the case of the clan invasions, they're invading because, well, they're clan. Who knows their hidden reasons for doing what they do. So we've got an all-over wash on it there, and that's going to give us our shading and do the bulk of the work for us in terms of the paint job. You know, there's not that much that we need to do now other than when that's had a chance to dry, go in and pick out some more of the details like the lasers, missiles, PPCs, all the components that are on the mech. So we're going to let that dry and then we'll be back in a little. Okay, so we let the Thunderbolt dry for about 35-40 minutes and make sure that wash is thoroughly dried. As you can see now, the colour of the camo has completely changed. The yellow has toned back a lot. If I show you one that's not been washed next to it, you can see that the colour of the camo has very much toned down. It's given it a very weather beaten and drained look. So what we're going to do now is go out and pick out a few of the details. So for these, I need Jungle Green by Army Painter and Crystal Blue. Now, I'm a big fan of making your weapons stand out, making it pretty obvious what it's armed with, and being originally raised on the MechWarrior games and the Battletech HBS game, Harebrained Schemes, and MechWarrior Online, I've got a big association with the colours of the weapons. In my eyes, large lasers are blue, medium lasers are green, small lasers are red, PPCs are purpley blue. So what I tend to do is the emitters for the various weapons I pick out in the appropriate colour. So large laser on the Thunderbolt's arm is going to get a dab of blue in there. Machine guns and autocannons stay silver because they're projectile weapons and they are closer to military. And then the medium lasers on the Thunderbolt's left torso here, each of those centre lenses gets a dab of green. There we go. Don't know if you can quite see that. There you go. It makes those lasers pop. And the large laser down on the bottom there in the blue. And that just gives a little bit more interest again to the model. The SRM racks again, we're going to touch them in. The SRMs and the LRMs, we'll touch them in with a dab of Iron Dark Sun, because when we washed them over earlier, they became very dull and very unobvious. And I really like the weapon systems on my mechs to pop. Helps in battle to differentiate what things are armed with as well, which can be very useful. So the LRMs or SRMs there on the torso there, just giving them a quick dab of the yellow. And then we'll go ahead and do the same with the LRM launcher. As you can see, there's still a few dobs of yellow showing, but we're just going to go in and dab in yellow into the little launch tubes there. So, I mean, don't worry about being perfect here. Obviously, at this scale, they've got a lot of launch tubes in this little LRM. It's an LRM 15. That's a lot of missiles for a relatively small miniature to have in one little drum on his shoulder. But it's always nice just to add a bit of visual interest to the model with a bit of extra colour. And it just looks like he's got a rack of LRM 15s in yellow there. So that is basically the mech done to what is my battle standard. Okay, I'd be quite happy to put that mech into battle now. I need to finish the base, and then later on when I've got a bit more time, or when I'm wanting to put a bit more of a finish to them, you can come back and you can add some battle damage. The only thing that's left to do is using the relevant washes, so Armoured Paint a blue tone and Armoured Paint a green tone. I put a wee wash on the lens emitters for the various weapons, so the large laser that's blue gets the blue wash and the medium laser screen gets the green wash. But that, I find, just softens that neon colour just a little bit, makes it look a bit more muted, a bit more realistic and a bit more effective. I'm working on a green mat here, and funnily enough the camo of the mech's actually making it quite well hidden there. So there's the Thunderbolt. Okay, next tutorial is going to be basing. I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do with the basing. I'm going to have a play around with a spare hex I've got, figure out what I want to do with basing, but it's probably going to be some sand, brown and standard sort of earth and static grass style base with a black rim. One thing I do like to do on my Battletech models is I'm going to mark the facing, the front facing in white, so it's very clear where my mech is facing for the purposes of the game. Obviously the rules say your mech is facing whichever way your legs are facing, but for example on some mechs that's less obvious than other mechs, because this locust, which of these two is it facing? It kind of faces both of them, so that'll help to say this is the front of my mech for the game. So that's that. I'll come back to you after I've done those ink washes and when I've figured out what I'm going to do with my bases. Okay guys, so I said I'd get a video of the finished mech on a higher resolution camera here. Autofocus on this camera is a bit shocking as well. But basically, as you can see here, this is what the finished Thunderbolt looks like. So again, like I said in the video, Thunderbolt's quite a simplistic mech in terms of its finished look. There's the large laser on the arm. There's all the iconography on the front. It's quite a simple one. Autofocus is gone here again. So there's that. So thanks for watching the video. I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen, and I've given you a few tips to help your own painting of these mechs. Obviously, the scale of the mechs and the relatively small size means that some basic skills really do pay off. Washes, you could throw dry brush in, and like I say, later on I may add some battle damage. But thanks for watching the video, and if you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel for more Battletech goodness. Thank you.
The year is now 3015, and these steel behemoths have become the tools of the mercenaries' trade. It's a lucrative time, yet one beset with perils of all kinds. Only the most skilled and brave among them will rise to become legend.